What's up, addicts? In this video, we're going to be going over Josh Allen and his fantasy outlook for the 2020 season. Also going to be doing this for over 100 players across the fantasy landscape. So if you like this kind of video, hit that like and subscribe button for more videos like this one. You can also check out how we have all of these guys ranked on our website. Just got to sign up for a free account. Go to fantasyaddictionnetwork.com and sign up today. But let's get right into it. So looking at Josh Allen from 2019, a lot of people will remember how good he was for fantasy. I don't think a lot of people know how poor he was for the NFL unless you're a Bills fan. Just in terms of a pure passer, he's been very inaccurate. Only 3,089 passing yards. That's very low. 20 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions, but 510 rushing yards and an absurd 9 rushing touchdowns is what has been carrying his fantasy value. Josh Allen is the typical quarterback that has way more value than he actually should because of how fantasy points are scored for rushing yards for the quarterback, being that they're at such a magnified rate than passing yards. And in 4-point touchdown leagues, Josh Allen sees an even bigger boost. If you play in a 6-point for a passing touchdown league, then it shrinks the gap a little bit. But finished the season with nearly 300 fantasy points, 297.5, put him at 6th at the position, and he had 18.6 fantasy points per game on average. So a pretty solid fantasy season last year in 2019. It came in a less than stellar type season. He had 6 games where he didn't even finish as a quarterback one. He had 2 games where he finished even worse than that in week 14 and 17. He had one phenomenal week against Miami, but who didn't have a phenomenal week against Miami? So he was very steady, very consistent. Very rarely did he completely destroy your team. And week 17 doesn't even really count because we all knew that they were going to be benching him for the playoffs. So I'm not going to hold that against him. So really the only game that you were upset starting him would have been week 4 against New England and week 14 against Baltimore. Otherwise, he was pretty much middle ground the entire time. But part of what carried him was how much he was scoring red zone touchdowns. And that can be said as to how good Josh Allen is in the red zone with those carries. It can also be spoken to how poorly the running backs in Buffalo were on the goal line with Frank Gore there. Frank Gore was nowhere near his old self and wasn't able to get the ball into the end zone at all. Devin Singletary didn't get too many looks in the red zone, but he wasn't able to convert many touchdowns as well. So Josh Allen was the primary carrier there. I I expect this to shift a little bit once we get into 2020. Obviously, with the addition of Stefon Diggs, the offensive line is the same, but in the year 3, you're going to expect that there's going to be a little bit of a push to see if Josh Allen can take a step forward as a passer. He's not going to continue to be able to rely on just running the ball every single week. Eventually, he's going to have to show that he's improving as a passer, or they're going to have to look for another option for Bills Mafia. Now, some stats I also want to review when considering Josh Allen, and we'll get into more of this when we talk about Stefon Diggs as well. He was actually number 8 in deep ball attempts last year, so it wasn't like he wasn't throwing the ball down the field. He had 72 deep ball attempts, but he only had a 25% deep ball completion rating. This is basically the opposite of what we've seen with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo had some of the least attempts, but he was the most accurate deep down the field, whereas Josh Allen throws the ball down the field a lot. And they got John Brown last year to be that field stretcher, and now they have Stefon Diggs, who also has a much better presence deep down the field than he is in the short and intermediate range. So they have 2 deep pass catchers now with Stefon Diggs and John Brown. It doesn't really make much sense considering that also the receiver target separation that the wide receivers in Buffalo were giving Josh Allen was 7th best in the league. So him missing on those deep ball attempts can't be blamed on anyone but him. He also was 46th in red zone completion. Think about that. There's 32 teams in the NFL, and he was 46th in red zone completion. So that is another reason as to why he was scoring a lot of those touchdowns on the ground. It wasn't because he was so good at doing it. It was because he was so bad at throwing the ball into the end zone that it was the only way for them to score. And again, the Bills' defense was really good, so it was able to sustain those lower scoring games. But if Josh Allen wants to prove that he is the quarterback of the Bills' future, he's going to have to improve as a quarterback, which I would argue, even if his passing numbers go up, if his rushing numbers go down, that's actually going to hurt his fantasy value. He was 33rd in true completion percentage, so that's completion percentage when you take out drops, and that's also really bad. And like I said, again, number 2 in red zone carries, so 22 overall, or second overall with 22 red zone carries last year. The guy touched the ball a ton in the red zone. That's where the vast majority of his fantasy value came from. With 9 touchdowns, that's 54 fantasy points. That's basically almost a sixth of his entire fantasy output came from running the ball into the end zone. So if that goes down, obviously we know that touchdowns are typically the least sticky stat year over year. They're the hardest thing to project. If his rushing touchdowns go down drastically, that's going to hurt him a lot. If his rushing yards go down, that would also hurt him. But he does have Stephon Diggs now, so we're anticipating his passing volume to go up. One thing to note as well with Josh Allen, he has a very weird schedule in which he starts the year out difficult and he ends it with the hardest schedule, at least as of now. I know defenses change once we get into the season, but looking at strength of schedule heading into 2020, Josh Allen has the second hardest strength of schedule for quarterbacks and the hardest by far in the fantasy playoffs. Obviously, you don't want to draft thinking about the fantasy playoffs because that's the surefire way of never making it to the playoffs, but it's still something to note. If Josh Allen isn't going to end up being there when you need him most, is it really worth having to spend up for him? Because right now he's still going decently high for quarterbacks when you consider how deep the quarterback position is in single quarterback leagues. So let's get into our projections. Obviously, a lot of what we've said we're carrying out into our projections. So we're anticipating his passing yards going up. We have him jumping up about 500 passing yards, getting up to about 3,600. We're expecting him to take a step forward with Stephon Diggs there now. John Brown is still there. Cole Beasley is still there. Dawson Knox will take another step forward. So we're expecting better things from him in terms of passing the ball. We give him a slightly increased passing touchdowns, few more interceptions, and then we're also bringing his running volume down just slightly as well with the addition of Zach Moss, most likely going to be running the ball a tad bit more efficiently than they were with Frank Gore last year. Devin Singletary there as well. So with that, again, we're projecting more towards the median with rushing touchdowns. If he's going to be throwing the ball a little bit more, and Stephon Diggs is going to be trying to command a lot of targets in the red zone, we expect his passing touchdowns to go down. Zach Moss should end up getting a few rushing touchdowns as well. So 6, I still feel like is on the high end. I don't think there's any chance of him getting back to 9. 6 was probably closer to his ceiling in terms of rushing touchdowns for 2020. So I feel like this is actually pretty close to his ceiling. I don't anticipate him jumping up to like 4,500 yards or 30 touchdowns or anything like that. He could definitely do it. I just don't see that in his range of outcomes. So I feel what we have right here with this projection is actually pretty close to his ceiling already. So that's why we have his upside at 3/5. There's not really much more that could go right for these stats to be boosted up unless he just completely turns a corner and is a completely different quarterback than we've seen. But after that meltdown in the playoffs against the Texans, it's concerning to me. If you have Josh Allen already or like in a keeper league, I'm concerned with him even be able to hit these projected numbers. We're using our metrics, we're using the improvements to the offense to come up with a reasonable expectation. And if he hits this, you'll be happy that he hit this. But even still, if he ends up finishing the season poorly, then what was it for? So I guess all that being said, I'm probably not going to be drafting Josh Allen really anywhere unless he falls incredibly far, because he does still give you that upside because he runs the ball more than most quarterbacks unless your name is Lamar Jackson. And that's always going to be worth something in fantasy. But overall, probably not going to be paying the price. Most, especially in single quarterback leagues, there's not really any reason to reach up for like these middle tier quarterbacks if they're going in like the 7th or 8th round. Now, I do want to commend the fantasy community right now. There has been a lot of quarterbacks that have been falling further and further down the draft board. It seems like, with the exception of Lamar and Patrick Mahomes, quarterbacks this year are being the most appropriately valued in single quarterback leagues that I've ever seen. So keep that momentum going. Don't take Josh Allen too early. It'll end up biting you in the butt later. There's too many other good players going around the 7th, 8th round right now. So probably not someone I'm targeting much But we'll get to his teammates in our next video, so hit that like and subscribe button for more, and we will see you guys next time.